I don't think that I'm doing anything miraculous, except that, all I'm doing is helping people get back to their native physiology, as I say, right? The one that burns fat.
Right.
But we have to combat this messaging on what the pros are doing, which is ultra high carb. And, you're racing right now at a very high level. And so you're one of those data points we have that refutes the fact. I'm not saying you're not taking in carbs, and that's one of the big misconceptions about what we're doing.
I certainly am still taking in my carbs, right? But minimizing them and using them, I shouldn't say sporadically, but definitely at a lower level and more strategically. Excuse me. Yes. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. What's your carb intake on race day?
Total, if we take Kona, I was taking in a pretty good amount of carbs, during the race here. So Kona ended up, so another thing I just missed on. So in Kona, I went 9 hours and 1 minute and 38 seconds. And my lifetime goal is to go under 9 hours there. So I fell 99 seconds short of that goal here. So, but if we're using a 9 hour window here of time here, obviously not taking anything in, prior to during the swim, but I did have some carbs. What I probably had 75 to 100 grams, before the race, about 3 hours before the race, letting that digest and everything like that. Obviously taking in a Vespa pre-swim. And then, on the bike, I do go on the heavier side on the bike. So I think I ended up right around 100 grams per hour on the bike here, in addition to my Vespas. So, from a racing perspective, I still am, a lot of people would argue was on the higher side there, but, strategically and in my training, it's definitely a lot different than that.
Yeah. So you're saving that high carb for race day. Your training, you're probably half most of the time?
Yeah, usually even less. Yeah. Depending on the duration of, I do typically, I'll say, do a standard kind of training plan where I'm usually doing my longer stuff on the weekend, right? So, that Saturday long ride will include some, relatively speaking, higher carbs. But, if I have, let's say, a 2 hour ride or, an hour and a half ride or something like that, I may take in, 25 carbs an hour or something like that, really just, with a good amount of fluids and still some salt and things like that, some sodium, but pretty low on the carb side, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's and when you're in a high training cycle, you do need the carbs, and we actually do promote that. People are taking them into when the training cycle is high, but when you go into, say, a recovery cycle, a recovery rides, recovery runs, and your volume goes down, the carbs go way down, don't they?
Right. Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. So yeah, I think that's probably, I am not a calorie counter per se here. And, while I'd say I'm strategic with it, I'm not overly strategic, and I'm not one that logs things crazy and things like that. So I'm shooting from the hip a little bit here, but yeah, that's definitely the general model for sure.
Well, you're a gunslinger, so you got to shoot from the hip.
Yeah.
Right.
I like it.
And that's, and that's what we teach is for people to be more intuitive about it, because the really highly structured way of approaching things is just, it's hard to keep track of, because, our conscious data driven minds can't handle it, and it produces a lot of stress.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I do think there is value to occasionally tracking, your food intake and logging things. And I do think that can be an eye opener sometimes of, what is actually, a true serving of whatever you're eating or something like that. Right. And measuring things, but I certainly don't do it on a regular basis.
Not in daily life.
Right.
Say the data corroborates the experience. It doesn't drive it, but we're living in a quote unquote data driven world.
Right. Oh, totally. Yeah.
And so I think when it comes to training and racing, we've got it kind of backwards. We're not trying to discount the data, but it's a tool, not the end all be all, right? And with all this technology, your Garmin, your bike speedometer, all these nutritional formulas, it gets a little over the top, and that's hard to manage.
It sure is. Yeah. And I think also, to speak a little bit more holistically, I think as somebody that's been in the game for 15 years, I've obviously made some adjustments and some pretty big swings, in this last year since I've been working with you. But I think that it goes along very well with the messaging and how you're trying to help the community to understand that, we don't need all these carbs, and, we don't need to be taking a gel every 20 minutes during training, and those kinds of things, which is a very common tactic and things that people, are encouraged to do. Right. So, but I think, at the same time, when you're newer to the sport, or if you have to obviously be confident in your nutrition strategy when it comes to racing. Right. So when you're newer to the sport, you may have to do a little bit more testing. But then once you've kind of validated that things work for you, you can kind of take a step back and eat a little bit more holistically and not, rely on those more of the, prefabricated materials, or products and things like that, and these gels and whatnot for your regular training.
Yeah, that's right. And those things have a place. It's just not like you say, every 15 to 20 minutes.
Right.
And here's another thing that's, I think, really important, because you are both a high level athlete and a coach. To do the metabolic output, right? The energy output to do a 9-hour Ironman, is very different from somebody doing a 13 or 15-hour Ironman. So in coaching your athlete, yeah.
Yes. I will argue and say I certainly, I think it's actually more amazing those people that are out there longer and how they're able to do it. And, it's not like they're working any less hard than I am. They're just, it's taking longer to do it. And, I have to joke, those are the people getting their money's worth. But, even from a coaching perspective, I find it much more challenging to coach somebody that's preparing for a 15, 16-hour Ironman versus a 9, 10-hour Ironman, because, getting the volume right, and there's so many more variables that go into it. It's challenging. Yeah.